Squawk passes.
Go for it.
Do you know where the switch is?
For the light? Sorry.
Way up here?
Good day. You're also going to learn
We'll take it with us.
Undergrad student. I said
Are you one of the ones with the fish tank? Or different
yes.
fish?
All right, everybody. Thanks for coming. Okay. I hope everybody enjoyed the tour. Did you guys hear any nocturnal callers at all? Anyone? What did y'all hear?
I think it was Texas cricket or something.
Crickets?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Snow cricket.
Snow cricket. Oh, really? Awesome. Okay, so today we have Luke Larter with us as Science Under starts. So Luke Larter is currently a PhD candidate in his 5th year at Integrative Biology at UT Austin. And he's a frog expert. He studies frog sounds and how that influences evolution in frogs. Okay, so welcome, Luke. Take it away.
Thank you, Luke.
All right, well, welcome everybody, and thank you for coming to my talk. I'll just go ahead and get started. It's not advancing for some reason. Okay, here we go. Okay, we're rolling. Okay, yeah, so I'm just going to get straight into it. So here's a little outline of what I'll be. Oh, it's not changing on the screen. Let me just try resharing or something. Weird. Oh wait, it's not even plugged in. Wait, are we using this one?
We're using that.
Oh, of course. Okay.
Yes.
There was some confusion before, and here we go. Okay, perfect. We're in control. Okay. So yeah, first a little bit of an outline. So first, I'm just going to tell you about kind of my journey to becoming the scientist or aspiring scientist that I currently am. And then just a little bit of background about sort of why do animals send signals, and then I'll move on to kind of talking about some of my favorite frogs and toads that call around the Austin area, the ones that I particularly like, and then I'll move on to talking about some calling insects. So first, yeah, a little bit about my background. So as Chiang-Yi said, now I study frogs, but I didn't always. So actually, my first foray into research was actually studying vervet monkeys in South Africa. So that was really fun. I got to live on this game reserve and hang out with monkeys. And, you know, they do tons of cute stuff. Like, you know, they're constantly, all the juveniles would get in these big puddles and kind of play and rough and tumble, and they groom each other and all this kind of cool stuff. And then actually I did my master's studying colobus monkeys. So I went to Ghana and I studied these black and white colobus monkeys here. And once again, you know, all kinds of cool monkey stuff. So this is the kind of the alpha male of this group, and then all of his kids and some of the women in that, and you know, some more monkeys playing and eating leaves and all this kind of cool stuff. But when I was doing this, I was, you know, being a monkey isn't actually always all fun and games all the time. I was studying male aggression, and actually in this species, there's this really cool display that males do. So they're like, this is called a stiff leg display. The males will sit on a branch and basically stick their legs out and hold them there for as long as they can. And basically the toughest guys can obviously hold their legs out for longer. So, they're basically signaling to each other like, look pal, I've got some pretty powerful legs here. You don't want me chasing you around and fighting with you, so you better back down basically. But anyway, the reason I bring this up specifically is when I was in the field thinking about this, I then read a lot about animal signals and the evolution of animal communication and stuff like that. So as cute as the vervet monkeys and the colobus monkeys are, now I study an organism which is twice as cute as both of those put together, the timbral frog. So I intentionally chose a bad photo for comic effect, but they actually are pretty cute. So the males kind of blow themselves up, inflate themselves with air and then float on the top of the water, as you can see here. And they're kind of ridiculous because they inflate themselves to about 2 to 3 times their normal size. You can see this guy's just blown up like a balloon. And then this is just showing that, through the course of a call, he'll push that air into what's called his vocal sac. And what I study is basically how the males are interacting with one another while they're calling. So what really drew me to these guys is they form these really dense choruses. So this is about a little over a meter section of drain, of like a drainage ditch, and there are 9 calling males in there, which I've highlighted with blue stars, all packed together, all calling, trying to be heard. So they're pretty cool. So this is what a tundra frog call sounds like. Oh wait. How do I put the volume up? Does anyone know how to put the volume up?
I hear it at the back.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to move.
I can hear it.
Yeah, it should be a little louder. It looks like there's room to increase the volume, but oh, you could hit the arrow. That makes sense. Okay, let me try it now. Okay, yeah. Yeah, so one more time. So yeah. Yeah, so that's a tundra frog call. It sounds like a laser gun or something. And then this is a chorus of like 30 or 40 tundra frogs. It's pretty crazy. They really just attack together, and it's chaos. Yeah. So anyway, so that's why I really like these guys. And obviously I'm going to focus on the Austin frogs and stuff, but I'm just using these guys as a little bit of background. So this is what their call looks like. So at the top we have like how the amplitude changes over time, so how the loudness of the call changes over time, and then at the bottom it's showing that the frequency also changes over time too. So as you can kind of hear, it starts with what's called a whine, which is like a descending frequency sweep, and then it has these kind of chuck notes added to the end. So I'll just play it one more time. So the whine followed by 2 chucks. And females in this species really like chucks. They really like calls with chucks on them. So now just a little bit of background about it. So why are animals like these tundra frogs spending all this time making these signals? So one important function that signals serve is that it reveals the location of potential mates. So obviously if a female is out there looking for mates, she could zigzag over the whole habitat and look out under every bush for a male, but that's a waste of time and energy, and also she's at high risk of predation when she's doing that, because obviously these frogs are small, and it's a jungle out there with predators and whatnot to eat her. So the male giving the mating call gives her, it's like a lighthouse almost. It gives her something that she can just direct herself towards and move towards, and know she's going to find a male there. Also, it reveals the identity of potential mates. So different species will have different frequency patterns in their call, so it will change in pitch differently throughout the calls of different species, and also different temporal structures, so how the notes in a call are connected together over time. And so, yeah, if you're out in, particularly like a tropical rainforest or something, the night is just thick with all kinds of noise from, hundreds of insect and frog species. So females need to be able to, in all of that cacophony, identify their own species. So a species will evolve unique calls so that they can be sure that they're communicating with one another and not with another one. And the female can be sure that she's not trying to mate with a male who's not of her species. Similarly, it's revealed the quality of potential mates. So females often have preferences for certain call features, and maybe only the strongest males can make those call features. So for example, as I said, in Tungara frogs, the females really like chucks, and maybe males who can produce calls with lots of chucks are larger and will give her better adapted genes for her offspring, or maybe Tungara frogs aren't territorial, but maybe in some species, larger males who can produce longer calls or something will have a nicer territory and she can get better food from mating with that male and being on his territory or something like that. But at the same time, the males out there signaling are also hearing one another's calls as well. So, but actually calls, they might be getting the same information from these calls that the females are, or at least similar information. So, it reveals the location of potential rivals. These calls reveal the identity of potential rivals. So I'm going to, if I'm a member of one species, I'm going to be competing more with other members of my species because we're competing for the same female. So I might need to pay attention to rivals of to callers of the same species more. And also, once again, it can reveal the quality of potential rivals. So I might not want to pick a fight with a guy who sounds really big and has really impressive calls. So that was just a little bit of background. So now basically I'm going to point out a few of the frogs and toads that are common around Austin, and just, you'll probably be familiar with lots of these creatures I'm going to talk about, but I'll just kind of show photos, talk about their calls, and say some interesting stuff about them. But first I'm going to talk about how frogs and toads make the sounds that they make. So much like us, they have lungs, and they make their calls by using their lungs to force air through a larynx, which makes the vocal cords in the larynx vibrate. But when we do that, all of the air that we force out of our lungs comes out of our mouth along with the sounds. But in frogs, that's not the case. When they're calling and when they're pushing air out of their lungs to call, that air is actually all diverted into what's called a vocal sac, which is this kind of balloon-like thing, which you'll definitely be familiar with if you've seen frogs calling before. And basically, the vocal sac has a couple of purposes. So one thing is that we draw air into our lungs by basically expanding our chest cavity that sucks air in. But actually, frogs and toads can't do that. They have to pump air in from their mouth. And so if you have seen a frog in a cage or a terrarium or something, you'll probably notice that often their chin is just kind of moving up and down all the time. So that's called buccal pumping. So that's actually the pumping, which is putting air into their lungs. But that's a very slow and effortful process. So if after every call, the male had to refill his lungs with that buccal pumping, that might take a long time, and he wouldn't be able to call that frequently because he'd be spending so much time doing this buccal pumping. But basically with the vocal sac, now the air being forced out of the lungs is forced into this balloon-like thing, and then when the call ends, the elasticity in that balloon basically forces the air back into the lungs, essentially right away. So it allows these males to call very quickly because they're refilling their lungs immediately after every call. And at the same time, actually, this vocal sac, when it's inflated, acts as a resonator. So it actually amplifies the salient frequencies in the male's calls so that their calls are louder and kind of radiated out more powerfully. So it's the same idea, of the body of an acoustic guitar, which acts as a resonator for the strings, and that's why an acoustic guitar sounds louder than an unplugged-in electric guitar. So now onto the kind of common Austin frogs and toads. So one that I'm sure everyone is here is familiar with is the Gulf Coast toad. So they kind of hang around most of the year, but it's basically the first rain in sort of April or May, when the weather starts to get hot, is when they'll come out and they'll start to call. So their call sounds like this. I'll just play it one more time. So it's kind of this, what we might call a trill, like lots of notes fast together. Yeah, and as I say, the first big rain on the hot day at kind of the transition between spring and summer, these guys will all gather around a local body of water and kind of line up on the edges and all make these calls. So they can actually have some really impressive choruses too. And of course, as many of you probably know, the reason that they're waiting around for that rainstorm, why that's so key to triggering their attempts to reproduce, is that lots of frogs and toads lay their eggs into water, and then those eggs hatch into tadpoles, which will kind of swim around for a few weeks and grow large and then metamorphose into frogs. So So that's why they're waiting for these bodies of water to be there. And another one which many of you will probably be familiar with, and some people have mentioned to me, is the cliff chirping frog. So here's the call of this guy. So you hear that all the time when you're walking around Austin. And so, interestingly, well, originally these guys will have kind of hung out in kind of craggy cliff sides and, hid in little holes in the cliffs. But that actually makes them really well adapted to an urban environment because, they can be very, very at home hanging out in holes in the walls of buildings or, in little nooks between fence posts and things like that. And actually another reason why they're so well adapted to urban life is actually, in contrast to the Gulf Coast toads, these guys don't need water to reproduce. They can actually just lay their eggs in like damp leaf litter or moist soil or something, and they'll be totally fine. And because of that, actually, these guys don't have a tadpole stage. They actually emerge from the egg as a little mini frog. So all of that development, which in other frogs and toads happens as a free living larva in the water, actually just takes place in the egg and they emerge as a small frog. And then, green tree frogs, if you go to some of the more wooded areas around Austin, you're likely to hear these guys. So they sound like this. So that's multiple males calling, not just one, I'm pretty sure. I haven't heard them myself at BFL here, but I looked on iNaturalist and there were recordings of them being here, so I guess they're around here too. And then finally I'll talk about the American bullfrog. So, these guys are really impressive because of their size. They're just a massive animal. And in vocalizing species, large animals tend to make deeper calls, and so you can see from the call of this one that I'm about to play that it sounds big. No, it doesn't just look big. And actually, what's really cool is you see this little disc here. So this is the frog's ear. That's basically its eardrum just on the surface. Instead of having its eardrum within like what is a pinna, which we have, this external fleshy bit, it just has it on the surface. But what's really cool is that in addition to them having vocal sacs like the other ones I talked about to resonate their calls, actually male bullfrogs have a really big ear, which is thicker than the females. And what scientists did some studies where they basically were able to prove that they were actually using their eardrums to resonate their calls too. So basically, their ears are not only used to hear calls, but also act as like a vibrating membrane, which resonates their calls more and makes their calls sound louder, which is pretty interesting. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the calling insects. And I'm going to start that off with a little game called Guess the Bug, which is you just guess the type of bug. I realized on my outline I actually accidentally had a spoiler there, so hopefully none of you were too eagle-eyed, but okay. Oh, name the bug. Okay. Grasshopper. Exactly. Okay, nice. Oh, okay, yeah, nice, okay. So the whole point of the game was so many people I talked to don't know what a katydid is, so that was kind of the point. So yeah, you guys are a little more on the ball. So yeah, these are katydids. There are kind of the meadow katydids, which are these variety on the left, which I'll talk about, and then there are the kind of true katydids, which look a little more leaf-like here. But you guys rock that game. And basically, so some simple rules of thumb to tell these guys apart. These are the rules of thumb I use. I don't know if they're diagnostic in all cases, but basically grasshoppers have very short antennae, whereas crickets are a little longer, but then you can't really see them here because they're cut off by the edge of the photo, but katydids have really long antennae, like often longer than their body length, so that's a good kind of diagnostic feature to use. And similarly, grasshoppers, to me, they always seem to have like just a much thicker back leg, whereas katydids and crickets, or at least particularly katydids, are a little more kind of slender and elegant and maybe not so thick in the thigh kind of thing. But yeah, okay, so how do these kinds of insects make their sounds? So they actually make their sounds with their wings. So on their left wing, they have what's called a file, which is also blown up on the bottom here. So it's basically a bunch of ridges in a row. And then on their right wing, they have what's called a plectrum, which is just a little scraper that they scrape along this file. So, you know, you can imagine like running your fingernail down a comb. That would make like a kind of sound, basically. And then actually connected to the plectrum, they have this thickened membrane on their wing, which, similarly to the frog's vocal sac, acts as a resonator. So again, once again, this kind of amplifies the frequency of the katydid's call so that it sounds louder and goes further for the females. And then, so when they're calling using this, you know, they're moving their wings back and forth over one another such that the plectrum scrapes across the file. And in some species, it's when the wings close that it makes a sound. In some species, it's when the wings open. And then there are some species that both the opening and the closing of the wings makes a sound. Oh yeah, so, you know, talking a lot about these guys making all this sound, you know, that would be pointless if they couldn't hear. So obviously they can hear, but does anyone want to guess where their ears are?
In their legs.
Oh, do you have a guess?
And their antennas?
It's a great guess, but I did hear the correct answer somewhere over here. But which was in their legs, actually. So their ears are these little holes you can see here, like right under the knee of their front legs. So you know, yeah, pretty weird. And here's another like potentially weird katydid thing. So often you'll see katydids and they'll have this big spiky thing at the end of their abdomen. So what do people think this is for? What is this thing?
Jousting.
It's a great guess. Any other guesses?
Like digging?
Kind of.
Yeah.
Digging for what purpose?
Oh, I don't know.
Okay.
Digging themselves?
Well, yeah.
For like digging for the winter?
Not quite, but it's a good guess.
And an ovipositor?
An ovipositor, perfect. Yeah. So they do use it to dig sometimes to lay their eggs. So you were partially right there. But yeah, it's not a stinger. You know, it looks very fearsome. Like especially this one on the right looks downright brutal. But basically, yeah, the females use this to put their eggs into safe places. So on the left we have a female inserting her eggs between the layers of a leaf, and then on the right here into a plant stem. And some species do use them to put their eggs into the ground. And obviously, this, you know, then keeps their eggs safe from predators and also keeps them in a moist environment so that they don't dry out. So yeah, if you see a scary looking katydid with what looks like a bad stinger, it comes in peace and it's just, you know, looking for somewhere to pick up its eggs, basically. Okay, so now I'll go through a few of my favorite Austin katydids and crickets. And again, a lot of you will be very familiar with these. So first we have the Texas fast chirping cricket. So that sounds like this. You know, they're kind of all over the place, so I'm sure you've heard that a lot. You know, basically, yeah, most of the times of the year, apart from maybe the really coldest months, when I'm walking around at night, I hear these guys in every little patch of grass, and they just hang out in holes, making their sound. And you know, it's pretty amazing. I was here for a couple of the really bad freezes over the last few years, and you know, and the crickets had been calling, but then the freezes came, and I thought, oh man, these guys are done for. But as soon as it thawed, they were back out calling again as if nothing had happened. So they're pretty hardy.
Does it change by temperature, the frequency, or the?
It probably does, yeah. And actually, when I talk about the snowy tree cricket, I'll come back to that. Yeah. Just take a drink. And then we have the common short-tailed cricket, who only seems to come out like in kind of the summer. Like I usually seem to see them maybe May through July. They're not out for as long as the Texas fast chirping cricket, and they have a bit of a different song. It's a bit louder, a bit more constant, and almost a bit noisier. They're like not quite as pretty to the ear, you know. And what I find so amazing about these guys is, you know, unlike the Texas fast chirping crickets who are hiding down in these holes, you know, obviously being very cautious. When I'm walking around, I just see these guys hanging out on the sidewalk, like, and you can see in the photo here, this guy's just on a wall calling. They really seem much more reckless than the fast chirping crickets. And as I say, they're not out for as long, so I wonder if just their strategy is, be bold, lock down a mate over these few months. So don't just take risks and make sure it happens, kind of thing. But yeah, so I'm walking around and just sitting on the sidewalk, happy as a clam. They'll just be there calling right out in the open. Okay, and so now into the tree crickets, and these are the ones that I pointed out on the tour earlier. So first we have the snowy tree cricket, which is the first one I pointed out to everybody, which has this kind of repetitive chirping call. Yeah, and interesting is this gentleman kind of pointed out, because insects don't regulate their body temperature in the same way we do, on a cold day an insect's body temperature will be colder, and vice versa on a hot day. Whereas, if we go out on a cold day, we're generating heat all the time, so our body temperature actually doesn't change much. But actually, the consequence of the body temperature being closely coupled to the environment is that when it's cold out, their muscles don't work as well. So this changes the way that they call. So some people call this the thermometer cricket, because basically, if you count the number of chirps it makes in a certain amount of time, you can pretty accurately predict the temperature in that environment. Without knowing any of the information, just counting the number of chirps per few seconds that this makes, you can predict the temperature, which is pretty cool. Because, as I say, the rate of calling is temperature dependent in that way. And another cool thing about these guys is when multiple males are calling, it can often only sound like one male. And that's because they actually synchronize their calls with one another pretty precisely. Synchronize meaning they'll produce those chirps at exactly the same time. And so this is pretty impressive. So you might think, okay, well, they're coordinating their call for some reason. It's a cooperative thing, but it's actually not. So if each of these is a snowy tree cricket chirp, basically female snowy tree crickets, if they hear two calls close in time like this, they'll really strongly prefer this first one, even if it only begins just a little bit before the following call. And so basically, those synchronizing calls are males trying to anticipate one another's next chirp so that they can make sure that they're a little bit ahead of the other one. And basically, them both jockeying to do that ends up with them being basically synchronous. But there'll be a little bit of difference, and they'll be going back and forth on who's the leading male there. So pretty amazing that competition is producing this really coordinated or seemingly coordinated behavior. And another cool thing about these guys is lots of tree cricket species actually will sometimes use leaves as what they call baffles. So basically, they'll actually modify these leaves, they'll chew a little hole, and then they'll hang out there to make their call. And in much the same way that if you're yelling at someone and you put your hands to your mouth like this, then your call will be louder or more directed in a certain direction. When they produce their calls like this, the call is actually amplified by the leaf and louder in that direction that the leaf is facing. So a pretty amazing example of an insect modifying, essentially in a way making a tool to amplify its own call. And then we have the Texas tree cricket, which I also pointed out on the walk. So this has a much more continuous call. So it's just kind of a long, sort of chirpy drone thing. Okay, and now we'll move on to the katydids. So as I mentioned before, there are kind of two broad varieties that most of the katydids around here fall into. And so one is the meadow katydids. And so here we have the Texas meadow katydid, which has calls which have what's called a buzz part, and then after the buzz there'll be these ticks. So keep an ear out for that. So this is the buzz. And then those are the ticks at the end. I'll just play one more time, just to make sure you didn't miss the ticks. And then the long-spurred meadow katydid also has a combination of buzzes and ticks, but actually starts with a series of ticks and then does its buzz. So listen for that. Ticks and its buzz. And so what's pretty cool about that is, obviously what first comes to mind when you hear these guys is, oh, they're doing this to attract a female. And indeed, the buzz part of the call is really important for attracting a female. But if you play them a call with buzzes and ticks versus a call with just buzzes, the females actually don't care. That difference isn't salient to them. But if you play the ticks to a male katydid, they will then sort of keep their distance from the speaker playing those ticks. So basically the buzz part of the call is directed at females and is to attract the females, whereas the ticks are directed at other males and are essentially an aggressive signal. But so just kind of an interesting example of, you know, one signal with different parts directed at different audiences. So it just kind of shows how complex these kind of neighborhoods of callers and these networks of interactions are. Yeah, and then, so this I think was the first katydid I actually saw with my own two eyes when I was in Austin. Because basically, even though I study frogs now, my pandemic project was studying katydids, and actually I studied the meadow katydids here. But yeah, these broad-tipped conehead katydids have like a very obnoxious call. It's like a very loud, very long drone, and I'm sure you've heard it because. And I was actually once, and in real life it's so loud. Like when I go up to try to grab them, I'm sure my hearing is being damaged. So now I always put headphones in. And actually, I was watching some dumb reality TV show one time, and it was set in Austin, and there were these, you know, teenagers hanging out by the pool or something. I could hear one of these guys in the background, and I was just laughing at, you know, thinking about this sound guy kind of looking under every bush for the stupid bug that was ruining their shot. And he obviously couldn't find them because they just did the shot anyway. But actually, what's really cool about these guys is, so this one here is brown. They come in actually brown morphs and green morphs. So you'll see the brown males at the beginning of the year. You know, probably like maybe if on a warm day in February or something, they might start calling. And so the brown males have basically hung out and hunkered down over the winter. And that's why they're brown. You know, if in the winter there's not a lot of foliage, it's not very green, so brown's a good color to blend in. But actually in the summertime, so these guys will then, you know, mate with females in the first few months of the year, have a generation of offspring, but those offspring will actually be green. So the summer males are green because, you know, in summer where there's lots of foliage, it's good to be green to blend in. But also another interesting thing about these morphs is they sing slightly different songs. So in much the same way that I said that the snowy tree cricket song changes depending on the temperature it's in, actually this hearing sensitivity of the females of this species also change a little bit in warm temperatures versus cold temperatures. And so they're actually sensitive to slightly different frequencies. And actually the brown morphs have a song which is best at stimulating the hearing sensitivity of females in cold temperatures, because that's when they're going to be encountering them. Whereas the summer morphs, who will be encountering females in the summer and warmer temperatures, sing a slightly different song, which is catered to the slightly different hearing sensitivity of those summer females. So a pretty amazing example of, you know, males doing very different things at different times of year because different things pay off at different times of year. And so even though that other one was the first one I saw in Austin, I think this was the first one I learned to identify by ear. So this is the greater angle-wing katydid, which it's still calling now. I heard one in my neighborhood just the other day. So to me, here it is. So it always kind of reminds me when you're on a roller coaster going up a hill, and there's obviously some latch kind of clicking as you're going up, but that's what it always makes me think of. And this is obviously of the variety that, you know, look very strikingly like a leaf. Oh, and then there's the red-eyed devil, who I've never actually seen in Austin myself. I've only seen them in counties to the west of here. But I had to put it in because it's a very impressive beast. You know, it's massive. So this is it, you know, with a hand for scale, and you can see it's really big. And it's predatory, so it has these really formidable, massive, sharp jaws. And when I've seen them eating stuff in the field, they're often eating grasshoppers and stuff like that. And actually, if you startle them, they have this aggressive display where they'll kind of wave their legs and then kind of show their ridiculous, tiny little blue wings at you to try to freak you out and make you go away. But you know, they're very impressive creatures. And they have a call that's, I would describe it as like squelchy, like listen to this. Yeah. Okay, so the final round of Name That Bug. Okay, nice. Well played. Yeah, so So, this is a talk about nocturnal callers. Cicadas are diurnal, meaning they tend to call in the day, not nocturnal to call at night. But I figured I would give them a shout out because they're pretty cool nonetheless. So how do these guys make their sound? So they actually have, once again, a completely different sound producing mechanism to any of the species we've talked about today. They have what are called timbals, which are these things on their abdomen, which are essentially thick plates of their exoskeleton. And with muscles attached to the inner parts of those plates, they can basically bend them in and out, and that makes a click. So if you think about when you get a jar of jam or like a bottle of Snapple, once you break the seal, that little metal bit pops out on the cap and you can kind of click it back and forth. Basically, that's how a timbal is working. The timbal is clicking back and forth, and each time it does so, it makes a click sound. And similarly to what we've seen in the other species, they also have coupled this sound-producing mechanism to a resonator. So they have an abdomen which has large hollow spaces in it. So those hollow parts of the abdomen act as a resonator, which again amplifies the sound. So I think it's just pretty amazing that we've seen 3 different lineages of animals, all of whom have evolved their sound-producing mechanisms completely independently. But they've all happened upon somewhat similar solutions. A sound-producing mechanism, in the frogs it was the vocal cords, in the katydids it was the plectrum and the file, and in the cicadas it's the timbals. And all of them have connected that to some sort of resonator. In the frogs, the vocal sac, in the katydids, that membrane on the wing, and in these guys, the hollow abdomen. So it's kind of amazing that when animals need to solve the same problems and need to be heard loud and wide, they often tend to happen upon solutions that use the same principles, but they actually achieve these principles in very different ways with very different sound-producing mechanisms, which is just pretty amazing. Well, and independently of that too, as I said with the guitar, the sound-producing mechanism is the strings, and the body of the guitar is the resonator. So human designers and engineers have also happened upon the same solutions, just because it works, basically. And so I don't know that much about the Austin cicadas, but it seems like they're mostly what are called the dog day cicadas, so from this genus Tibicen. And so here I have pictures of Tibicen texanus at the top, and then Tibicen pruinosa at the bottom. And I'm sure you know what these guys sound like, but it's, the sound of salmon. So that's the end of my tour of my favorite callers in Austin, and as I showed, there are lots of creatures out there, all of them making interesting sounds in interesting ways, and so sound is very important to these guys. So as I've said, lots of these critters are well adapted to urban environments, but one thing they have to deal with is loud sounds can interrupt their ability to communicate. The sound of a highway or something could drown out mating calls. And so, a new frontier of conservation is kind of figuring out how to protect these communication channels and things like that. And basically keep your ears open. I would encourage you to just go on walks around your neighborhood. Like, I find it really gratifying, like when I hear the first I forget the common name, but the Orchelinum sylvaticum katydid call of the year. It's it's like bumping into an old friend, and it's a very gratifying, very nice feeling. So I put these websites here, and this talk will be on YouTube, so you can also get the websites from there too. But this website at the top is actually a local entomologist, I think she's just an amateur entomologist, but she really knows her stuff. And this has an article on all of the katydids you're likely to meet in Austin, or you're likely to see in Austin. And then actually you can cross-reference that with this OrthSoc, which is basically a catalog of all the calls of different species of singing insects in North America. So actually this was how I got started recognizing them, was I did just cross-reference the katydids mentioned in this article with the calls here. And then you can just kind of keep them on your phone, examples, listen out, compare, and soon you can identify the insects around you. So I'm happy to take any questions that anybody has.
I'm curious about the cones. Are they directional, meaning they have to move in the same direction across the cone, or can they go?
Well, I think think so, yeah, because, yeah, I mentioned that some species only make sound when they open their wings, and some only when they close, which I guess implies that, you probably, well, yeah. They're probably best make sound one way, and then they're probably just avoiding touching them the other way. But it might make sound the other way, but they don't. But there are some species that make sounds on both strokes, so that is obviously making sound in both directions. Yeah.
For the katydids that had like the brown morph and the green morph, is like the brown morphs will always make green babies and then the green morphs will always make brown babies, or is it kind of like related to temperature more? It's
a really good question. I actually don't know the mechanism. Yeah, I would guess that it was related to temperature or something, rather than it just always being in that sequence, because you would think that sequence would like drift out of alignment with the seasons at some point. So I would guess that it's temperature sensitivity or some other environmental cue, but I'm not actually sure.
What made you switch from monkeys to frogs?
Well, it was actually just reading about animal communication. Well, so monkeys are still really cool, but basically I got into monkeys because I actually did my undergrad in psychology, and I happened to take a primate behavior course, and I really liked that. And so the primatologists at my university were in the psychology department, so I just took it, by chance. And then, yeah, I thought I was just really into monkeys, but once I read a little more broadly, I realized I was just interested in kind of the evolution of behavior in general. And frogs are really great. I really like them because you can do quite detailed experiments with them. Like, you can set up some speakers, play some frog calls that are slightly different, and just put a female in the middle, and she'll just hop to one or she'll hop to the other. And so you can very easily get a metric of like which call is preferred by the females. Whereas doing experiments with monkeys is very difficult to get approval, and logistically they're bigger and they're in trees. And so the frogs I really like because they're really tractable. Like I've had loads of fun designing and implementing experiments with the tundra frogs. Yeah.
So with the female preferences, is that consistent? Like, will multiple females always be attracted to the same kind of?
Yeah, there's a little bit of inter-female variation, but that's usually in how strong the preference is. But like for example, I showed with the wine, the females really love the calls with the chucks. So if you play just a wine versus a wine with a chuck, like 90% of the time the females will go to the wine with the chuck. And basically in all females it will be the majority of the time, but in some females maybe it's 60%, another female maybe it's 90%. But yeah, obviously like more subtle preferences, that's a really strong one, but more subtle ones, you might have some that just don't care at all because of that same variation. But no, it's amazingly, my advisor Mike has been studying these guys since the 80s, and he basically plotted the proportion of females choosing a wine chuck versus a wine over like 20 years of data. And it's like almost exactly the same. It's like 90% of females every single year. And that's literally like 20,000 individual trials of a female choosing one speaker or another. So it's amazing. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I was going through you. Yeah.
Related to that, I was curious, like if it is beneficial to just have a chuck, is it the males can't do it, or like they haven't learned how to? Like what is it that distinguishes them?
Well, so it's actually a very interesting system because so the females really love chucks. So males who make chucks are really conspicuous to females and they're likely to be chosen. But there's actually a bat that lives in that area that is actually specialized to listen out for frog calls and go and find the males by their calls and eat them. And unfortunately for the males, the bats really love chucks too. So basically, the males will only make chucks if they're in a chorus with lots of other males, because then, there's safety in numbers, because if a bat comes by, he might eat the other guy and not you. But if you're alone and you're making chucks, you're going to be the one that gets eaten. So, but then there is variation in how many chucks they can make. Like most males can only make 2 chucks. But then I've seen some males make up to 4 or 5 chucks. So there is some variation, but all males can make at least 1 chuck, I'm pretty sure. But then actually an important thing there is actually the frequency of the chucks. Females prefer lower frequency chucks because those indicate larger males. Like larger bodies just make lower frequencies, so lower frequency chucks indicate larger females, which the females prefer. Yeah. Oh yeah.
What do female cicadas look for in the calls?
Good question. I actually don't know. Like I don't know much about cicadas at all. But yeah, it's a good question.
It's like you said, it's kind of cacophony.
Yeah, exactly. Like what's always good is to be good and loud. So I'm sure males differ in how loud they are, and I'm sure that helps. But yeah, in terms of like do the females care about frequency or like duration of the calls? Or I actually have no idea. It's an interesting question. Any final questions? Oh, here we go.
So I was wondering, in terms of, like I guess alternative strategies reproductively with the frogs that make the chucks.
Yeah.
So if there's a frog that's making like less chucks than say like another frog, considering if there's like this association with like predators and stuff like that, and they're kind of typically doing it in a group, do those frogs that are making less chucks, do they benefit by being by those larger males, so that like females might, I guess in haste, kind of like end up reproducing with them, or do they avoid those larger males because maybe they're more territorial and they're larger?
Yeah, it's a good question. We don't really know. Like, you know, it's so hard to study these things in the wild, like where a male is choosing to call. Definitely, there are no males who just sit there and don't call. Like, as I said, my advisor, Mike, has studied them extensively for decades. He's never seen males who just sit there and don't call, which actually does occur in some other species of frogs and insects. But you're right, yeah, if you're calling next to a really attractive guy, maybe that would be beneficial. But at the same time, if the female gets close, she's more likely to choose the good-looking guy or the good-sounding guy too, perhaps. So like,
Does it tend to be?
It's hard to say.
Does it tend to be that more, that like fitter females tend to go for the males that are be more likely to end up with the males that are producing more chucks, and then kind of casts out almost?
I'm really not sure actually. Like, yeah, as great as the experiments these frogs are for doing experimentation, like the real kind of challenge and the next frontier of all this stuff is taking it into the field and actually just finding a chorus and studying it. And I think that would allow us to answer these kinds of questions. And technology is kind of getting there. Now you can set up like an array of microphones around a chorus, and that can kind of triangulate where these males are and like unmix their calls from the noise and stuff. But it's hard to say. Yeah, once you get all the social dynamics going on, it gets very complicated. But those are great thoughts and interesting questions to look at. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you for an amazing talk. So next month our event will be on December 12th, and it's going to be about how plants shape our world. And then have a good night, everybody. Feel free to grab a sticker on your way out.
Thank you.